Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. Once you wear this, Alex, your body will know how to be a girl. The voice was behind me. It was so cold, so close, that I didn't even have time to turn around before the world tilted on its axis. One moment, I was standing in the cavernous, dust-choked belly of an abandoned pharmaceutical lab in Newark, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. My heart was a drum against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and triumph. I had the proof. Finally, after months of chasing shadows, I had found the heart of Black Eagle's operation. The next moment, a sharp, piercing pain shot through my neck, a pinprick of ice that spread through my veins like a chemical fire, and my limbs turned to lead. My knees buckled, my maglite clattered across the grimy concrete, its beams skittering wildly across rusted steel drums and discarded equipment before settling on a dark corner. I tried to speak, to yell, but my tongue was a useless slab of meat in my mouth. A man stepped out of the shadows and into the weak beam of my fallen light. He was tall, impossibly thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old ivory. His lab coat was immaculately white, a stark contrast to the filth of the room. This had to be him, Dr. Mordecai Vane. "Don't fight it, Alex," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing, as two figures in tactical gear hauled me to my feet. They didn't punch me, they didn't drag me, they handled me with a strange, detached efficiency, like I was a piece of sensitive equipment being relocated. Resistance only creates unnecessary friction. My mind was screaming. I was a journalist. I had a right to be here. I had rights, period. But my body was no longer listening to my brain. It was a dead weight, a puppet with its strings cut. They strapped me into a chair that felt more like a dentist's nightmare than anything else. Cold metal arms clamping down on my wrists and ankles. Vane circled me slowly, his eyes not filled with malice or anger, but with a terrifying, unnerving curiosity. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen. "We've been watching you for a long time." "Alex," he continued, picking up a tablet from a nearby table. He swiped through it, his face illuminated by the cold blue light. "You're relentless, incorruptible. You believe in absolute truth, a very masculine perspective." He stopped in front of me, his gaze analytical. "We're not going to hurt you. We're not going to torture you for information. That's so crude, so unimaginative. No, we're interested in something far more profound. Empathy." My thoughts were thick and syrupy, but I managed to focus on his word, empathy. "You see," he said, gesturing to the room around us. "You look at our work and you see monsters. We look at humanity and see a species trapped in cages of its own making. Gender, identity, all brittle constructs. We believe that to truly understand something, you must become it. We're going to give you a gift. Alex, we're going to force you to live a life you never chose, to feel the world through a vessel you can't control. A lesson in perspective." He nodded to the figures beside me. They unstrapped me from the chair and guided my unresponsive body towards the center of the lab, where a monstrous machine stood waiting. It looked like an MRI tube, but with a complex web of wires and humming conduits snaking out from its core. They called it Prometheus's clay. It was the source of everything I had been investigating, the technology Black Eagle used to fundamentally alter a person's biology. As they laid me on the cold slab and began sliding me into the machine's humming throat, panic finally broke through the chemical haze. A raw, primal fear. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. Vane's face appeared in the opening of the tube. "Upside down from my perspective, this isn't about punishment," he said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "It's about enlightenment. When you wake up, you will understand." Then the door sealed, plunging me into absolute darkness. There was no sound. At first, just the feeling of my own frantic breathing. Then came a low hum, a vibration that started in my bones and radiated outward. It was a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to shake the very atoms of my being. A strange warmth bloomed in my chest, spreading through my torso, down my arms and legs. A tingling heat that felt like my blood was slowly coming to a boil. My body began to ache. Not the sharp pain of an injury, but a deep structural ache. as if my skeleton was being softened, reshaped. I felt a pulling sensation in my hips, a strange tightening across my chest. The feeling was intimate, invasive. It was as if 1,000 invisible hands were kneading my flesh, my muscles, my bones, rearranging me from the inside out. It was a violation on a cellular level. My raw thoughts were a chaotic jumble. This isn't real. It's a hallucination. The drug they gave me. I'm still Alex. I am Alex Chen. I clung to my name like a life raft in a churning sea. But the physical sensations were too overwhelming, too specific. I felt a jolt, a bioelectric shock that made my teeth grind together. My skin prickled, every nerve ending firing at once. A pins and needles sensation that was both agonizing and bizarrely sensitive. It felt like I was wearing a new skin, one that hadn't settled yet, one that was too tight in some places and too loose in others. The process seemed to last for an eternity. There was no pain, not in the traditional sense, but there was an overwhelming sense of dissolution. I was being unmade. Alex Chen was a structure, and the foundation was being ripped out from under him. The anger I felt earlier had evaporated, replaced by a pure, crystalline panic. Then, that too began to fade, drowned out by the sheer physical noise of the transformation. I was no longer a person, I was a process. I was clay on a wheel, spinning so fast that all sense of self blurred into nothingness. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The humming ceased, the heat faded, the pulling and aching subsided. I was left in the silent, suffocating dark, my body feeling foreign and strange. I was still me, wasn't I? The mind inside was still Alex, but the vessel felt profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. They left me in there for what felt like hours. When the door finally hissed open, the sudden rush of light was blinding. I didn't have the strength to move. One of the faceless orderlies reached in, unstrapped me, and lifted me from the slab. My feet touched the cold concrete floor. I was naked. A deep primal shame washed over me, so powerful it made me dizzy. I instinctively tried to cover myself, but my own hands felt alien. They were smaller, the fingers more slender. I looked down, and my mind simply refused to process what it was seeing. The chest wasn't flat. The hips curved in a way they never had before. My entire body was different, smoother, softer. This wasn't a costume. This wasn't a trick. This was real. A wave of nausea and vertigo crashed over me, the last thought I had before my new, unfamiliar body gave out and the world went black was a single, repeating question, a seed of conflict planted in the freshly tilled soil of my being. If they can change my body, what else about me isn't real? I woke up to the color beige, beige walls, beige sheets, a beige ceiling. The air was sterile, filtered, smelling of nothing at all. For a disoriented moment, I thought I was in a hospital. I sat up, my head throbbing with a dull ache, and the sheet pooled around a waist that felt too narrow. The room was simple. Anonymous, a bed, a small table, a single, sealed window showing nothing but an overcast sky, and on the wall opposite the bed, a mirror. It was large, bolted flush against the wall, a cruel, seamless sheet of glass that reflected the entire room. It reflected the beige bed, the beige walls, and the person sitting in it, a woman. My first thought was a flare of panic. Where am I? Who is she? She had dark hair, tangled and falling just past her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a familiar terror. My terror. I moved my hand, and she moved hers. I pushed myself up further on the bed, and she did the same. Oh God. The realization didn't come in a wave. It came like a physical blow to the stomach, knocking all the air from my lungs. That was me. The stranger in the glass was me. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The movement felt wrong, clumsy. My center of gravity was off, shifted lower. I stood up on shaky legs, my balance precarious, and took a hesitant step toward the mirror, then another. My heart was a frantic, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. My breath came in shallow, sharp gasps. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a very, very bad dream. Standing in front of the mirror, I was forced to see. The face looking back was undeniably built on my own features, the same dark eyes, The same nose, but everything was softer, the jawline less pronounced, the cheekbones higher. My neck was slender, my shoulders narrower. I raised a hand to my throat, and the stranger in the mirror mimicked the gesture. My fingers traced the line of a delicate collarbone I'd never had before. The skin was soft, impossibly smooth. I had to hear it. I had to know. I opened my mouth, a dry rasping sound escaping at first. I swallowed, tried again. "Hello?" The voice that answered was not my own. It wasn't high-pitched or shrill, but it was distinctly female, a tone or two higher than my old voice, with a different resonance, a different timbre. It felt like a stranger was speaking from inside my own throat. The sound of it sent a fresh wave of revulsion and disbelief through me. This body was a prison, a cage made of my own flesh. I hated it. I hated the sight of it, the feel of it. But I couldn't look away. My gaze drifted downward. The subtle, unfamiliar curves of my hips, the shape of my legs. It was a morbid, horrified fascination. I was cataloging my own desecration. I refused to call this body me. It was it. It was a thing that had been done to me. A quiet chime sounded, and a slot opened in the wall. A tray slid out, holding a neatly folded set of clothes and a glass of water. The clothes were simple as soft, gray cotton t-shirt and a pair of black, loose-fitting pants made of some kind of stretch fabric. They were a woman's clothes. Of course they were. A disembodied voice, cool and professional, echoed from a hidden speaker. "Please change into the provided attire. Your previous clothing has been disposed of." For a long moment, I didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to rage, to fight. But what was the point? I looked at my reflection again, at this naked, vulnerable stranger. The fight was already lost, with a sense of profound defeat. I picked up the clothes. The cotton of the t-shirt felt different against my new skin. My old shirts were coarse, utilitarian. This was soft, thin, and it clung in ways I wasn't used to. I pulled it over my head, and the fabric slid over a chest that was no longer flat. The sensation was so alien, so deeply wrong, that I flinched. The pants were even worse. They were designed to accommodate hips, to follow curves. As I pulled them on, the fabric hugged my body, a constant, tactile reminder of the new shape I inhabited. It made me hyper-aware of every single movement. I walked a few steps, and the fabric swished against my thighs. My stride was awkward, my new balance still a mystery. I felt exposed, unbalanced, a marionette learning to walk again. I caught my reflection in the mirror once more, dressed now, but no less of a stranger. In fact, the clothes made it worse. They legitimized the transformation, made it look intentional. My anger returned, a hot, bitter bile rising in my throat. This was Vane's empathy. This was his enlightenment. It was a violation so complete that it went beyond the physical. He hadn't just changed my body. He was trying to colonize my identity. As I stood there, staring at the woman in the mirror, I noticed something subtle, a small, unconscious adjustment. I had shifted my weight to one hip, a slight tilt in my posture that I had never made as a man. My hand rested lightly on my side. I hadn't told my body to do that. It had just happened. A flicker of deep, primal fear shot through me. Vane's words echoed in my head. "Your body will know what to do." I immediately straightened my posture, standing rigidly, trying to reclaim some semblance of my old self. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt was planted. This body wasn't just a prison. It had instincts of its own, and I was trapped inside it, a passenger in a vessel that was already starting to move without my permission. I spent 2 more days in that beige room, a cage where the only entertainment was the stranger in the mirror and the disembodied voice that gave me instructions. Eat, sleep, perform the physical assessments. They were simple, humiliating tests. Walk in a straight line, pick up a small block, test your reflexes. They weren't testing my strength. They were cataloging my adaptation to the new hardware. Each successful, fluid movement felt like a small betrayal of the man I used to be. On the 3rd day, the door slid open, not with a chime this time, but a heavy, decisive thud. A woman stood there. She was severe, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that showed no emotion. She wore a gray pantsuit, the uniform of Vane's bureaucracy. "It is time to prepare you for integration," she said, her voice as flat as her expression. She carried a small, plain cardboard box. Prepare me for what my new voice asked, the sound still jarring to my own ears. She ignored the question, stepping into the room and placing the box on the bed. "You will put these on. Instructions are included for items you may find unfamiliar." She left as silently as she had arrived, the door hissing shut behind her. I stared at the box, my stomach twisted into a cold knot. I knew this wasn't just another set of clothes. This was something different. This was a deeper layer of the indoctrination. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was women's underwear. It wasn't flashy or provocative, no red lace or black satin. It was simple, practical, and undeniably, terrifyingly female. There was a beige bra, its molded cups and intricate straps looking like a piece of complex machinery, and 2 pairs of matching cotton panties. My first reaction was a hot flush of shame that spread from my neck to my cheeks. My breathing grew shallow. This was a line, a boundary of intimacy and identity that felt more significant than the clothes I was already wearing. The t-shirt and pants were a uniform, something imposed on me. This was personal. This was the first layer you put on in the morning, the last you take off at night. It was meant to shape, to support, to define the body beneath the clothes. I picked up the bra. The material was soft, with a slight stretch to it. The underwire was stiff and unyielding. It felt like an instrument of confinement. My hands fumbled with the clasps at the back, a series of tiny hooks and eyes that seemed impossible to navigate. The included instructions were a simple, sterile diagram, which only added to the humiliation. After several clumsy, frustrating attempts, I managed to get it on. The sensation was a shock to my system. It was tight. It lifted and separated, creating a shape that was completely alien to me. The straps dug into my new narrower shoulders. The underwire pressed against my ribs. It was a constant, restrictive pressure, a physical reminder of the flesh I was now forced to carry. I felt contained, packaged. It was simultaneously a feeling of being protected and being profoundly vulnerable. My body was being defined by this garment, molded into a specific feminine form. I stood in front of the mirror, my arms stiff at my sides. The sight was grotesque to me. It made the change undeniable, irreversible. I instinctively hunched my shoulders forward, a futile attempt to hide the new silhouette. But then, as if on its own accord, my body reacted, my back straightened, my shoulders pulled back, adjusting to the support. It was another one of those terrifying, unconscious shifts. The garment was teaching my body how to wear it, and my body was listening. Next were the panties. I picked them up, the soft cotton a stark contrast to the rough boxer briefs I had worn my entire life. Pulling them on was a fresh wave of degradation. They were snug, form-fitting, offering none of the loose freedom I was used to. The fabric clung to my skin, a second skin that felt both intrusive and oddly secure. Dressed in this new foundation, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. There was the burning shame, the white-hot anger at Vane and his people, but beneath it, there was something else, something I was terrified to name. The feeling of being put together, of being contained by the underwear, wasn't entirely negative. It was a structure, a definition. My old body had been a simple fact. This new one was something that had to be managed, assembled. A thought, poisonous and unwelcome, slithered into my mind. What if I get used to this? What if this profound discomfort, this constant awareness of fabric against my skin, begins to fade? What if it starts to feel normal? What if, one day, I put this on without thinking about it, without the surge of shame and anger? What would that mean? Would that be the moment Alex finally dies? The thought was so horrifying that it made my stomach drop. I stared at the woman in the mirror, this stranger being constructed piece by piece, layer by layer, from the inside out. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror that was all my own. The clothes were a costume, the underwear a cage. But the body was starting to feel like a fact. and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending it wasn't mine. The door opened again an hour later. It was the same severe woman. She didn't look at me, but at a tablet in her hand. "The subject's biological and postural adjustments are within expected parameters," she said. "More to the room than to me. Phase 2 is complete. Prepare for release." "Release?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Release where?" She finally looked up, her eyes cold and clinical. "Your former life has been archived. Alex Chen ceased to exist 48 hours ago. A tragic but not entirely unexpected casualty of an industrial accident at a chemical plant. All records have been sealed." My blood ran cold. My apartment, my car, my contacts, my research, my entire life's work, gone, wiped clean. It was as if I had never existed. "We have, however, created a new identity for you," she continued. Unimpressed by the look of horror on my face, she handed me a thin wallet, a fresh start. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside was a driver's license. The picture was of me of this new me taken while I was unconscious. The name read Alexis Chen. Below it were credit cards, a social security card. Everything needed to exist in the modern world, all bearing that new name. Alexis, Lexi for short. Probably. It was a cruel, mocking echo of my own name. "You have a small apartment in Greenwich Village," the woman stated. "A bank account with sufficient funds for you to establish a new life. You will be monitored." "Of course. But you are, for all intents and purposes, free." "Free?" I choked out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You've destroyed my life, trapped me in this, and you call it freedom." "We call it an opportunity," she said, without a trace of irony. "To gain a new perspective, consider it a long-term field study. Your transportation is waiting." And that was it. I was dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a blue button-down shirt, both from a women's clothing line, both fitting this new body with an unnerving precision, and escorted out of the facility. The sudden blast of cool, damp city air was a shock after days of filtered, sterile nothingness. A black town car was idling at the curb. No one said goodbye. The door closed behind me, and the car pulled away from the nondescript building, leaving my old life and the man I was to rot inside. The ride to New York was a blur of muted panic. I was no one, a ghost in a stranger's body, heading toward a life I didn't ask for. When the car stopped in front of a quaint brownstone on a tree-lined street, the driver simply got out, placed a single key in my hand along with a suitcase, and drove off. I stood on the sidewalk, the sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the chatter of people, the rumble of the subway beneath my feet assaulting my senses. My suitcase felt heavy. My new body felt fragile. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I could run, but where would I go, as who Alex Chen was dead? Defeated. I walked up the steps and unlocked the door to my new prison. The apartment was small, clean, and completely impersonal. It was furnished with cheap, generic furniture, the kind you'll find in a corporate rental. It was a life, pre-packaged and waiting to be inhabited. The suitcase contained more clothes, all for Alexis, nothing for Alex. The first few days were a waking nightmare. I barely ate. I showered with my eyes closed, refusing to look at or touch the body I was in any more than necessary. But survival is a relentless instinct. The money in the bank account wouldn't last forever. I had to go outside. I had to buy food. I had to exist. Which meant I needed more clothes. My first trip to a department store was one of the most surreal and humiliating experiences of my life. I stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of Macy's, the air smelling of 1,000 clashing perfumes and the faint, greasy scent of the food court. Music I didn't recognize played softly overhead. Everywhere I looked, I saw women. They moved with a confidence and ease that I couldn't comprehend, browsing through racks of brightly colored fabrics, holding dresses up to their bodies, chatting with their friends. I felt like an imposter, a spy in enemy territory. Every person who glanced in my direction felt like an accusation. Oh God, everyone is staring. They know. They can tell I don't belong here. Do I look like a clown? I grabbed the first things I saw that looked remotely plausible: a simple dark green A-line dress, a plain black jacket, and a pair of flat shoes that looked forgiving. I fled to the dressing room, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was a small, claustrophobic box with a mirror that told me the same lie the one in the beige room did. I stripped off the jeans and shirt and pulled the dress over my head. The zipper was on the side, an awkward, unfamiliar placement. As I struggled with it, I felt a fresh wave of frustration. Nothing was simple anymore. Even getting dressed was a puzzle. When I finally got the zipper up, I looked in the mirror, and for the first time, something shifted. The dress fit. The color didn't look garish. The cut was simple, but it fell correctly over my new frame. It didn't look like a man in a costume. It looked like a woman in a dress. A strange, disquieting thought wormed its way through my panic. This doesn't look bad. The thought terrified me. I hated it. But it was there. This was the first piece of clothing I had chosen for this body, not one that had been forced on me. And it worked. It was a costume, yes, but for the first time, it felt like a convincing one. My mind was still screaming that this was all a performance, a role I was being forced to play. This is what Alex Chen, the investigator, would do. Blend in, survive. But as I stood there, a different voice, a quieter one, began to whisper from a place I didn't recognize. It wasn't Alex. It was Alexis, and she was thinking, this role, I might be able to pull this off. The internal battle raged as I paid for the clothes, but as I walked out of the store and back onto the streets of New York, the dress swishing gently against my legs with each step, I felt a subtle change. The world didn't stop and point. No one stared. I was just another woman. Walking through the city, I was invisible, and in that invisibility, there was a strange, terrifying kind of safety. I was still playing a part, but the costume was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a shield. The ghost of Alex Chen wouldn't let me rest. He was the voice in my head, the angry, desperate man demanding that I not get comfortable, that I not forget. He screamed at me to fight back, to find a way to dismantle Black Eagle and reclaim the life that had been stolen. So as Alexis Chen, I began to investigate my own murder. I started where Alex had left off, with the name of a low-level data broker he was supposed to meet, a man named Sam. Alex had built a fragile rapport with him over encrypted messages, but they'd never met in person. Contacting him as a dead man was impossible. Contacting him as a woman, however, that was a different story, a different strategy. I found him where he said he'd be: a dimly lit, noisy bar in Hell's Kitchen that smelled of stale beer and fried food. I sat at the bar, nursing a club soda, my back straight, my hands folded around the cool glass. I wore the green dress I'd bought, a simple, unassuming choice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a familiar rhythm of fear and adrenaline. This was field work. I knew this, but the field had changed, and so had my equipment. He slid onto the stool next to me 20 minutes later. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low. I turned. It was him, the same round face and nervous eyes from the grainy photo in Alex's file. "You could say that," I replied. My voice steady, practiced. I had spent hours in the apartment speaking into a recorder, learning the pitch and cadence of this new voice. "You look like you could use something stronger than that," he offered, signaling the bartender. The conversation that followed was a delicate, dangerous dance. I wasn't a journalist seeking a source. I was a woman in a bar, and he was a man. The dynamic was completely different. He leaned closer when he spoke. His gaze held mine for a fraction of a second too long. It wasn't aggressive or crude, but it was intentional. He was performing his own role, the charming, slightly roguish stranger. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. A heat bloomed in my cheeks, a blush I couldn't control. My pulse quickened, a nervous flutter in my throat. It wasn't arousal. It wasn't desire for him. It was the primal, instinctual reaction to being seen, to being the focus of a specifically male attention. As Alex, I was used to being assessed as a threat, a rival, a professional contact. I had never, not once, been assessed as an object of potential desire. I felt his eyes drift from my face, down to my neck, to the collar of my dress, and back up again. It was a quick, fleeting glance, but it felt as tangible as a touch. The weight of it was staggering. My skin prickled, my stomach dropped. I was furious with myself for the reaction, for the involuntary flush of heat, the shallowing of my breath. This body was betraying me. Responding to social cues I was only just beginning to understand. "He's just a source," Alex's voice snapped in my head. "Focus on the intel. This is a means to an end." But it was more complicated than that. I realized, with a jolt, that this new identity was a tool. Sam was more relaxed with me than he ever would have been with Alex. He was trying to impress me. He let details slip, boasting about the kind of high-level data he had access to, trying to paint himself as a player. He saw a pretty woman who looked out of her depth, and his guard was down. "I hear whispers, you know," I said, leaning in just slightly, pitching my voice to be both confidential and a little helpless. "About companies that operate in the shadows, like Black Eagle." His smile faltered for a second. "That's deep, dangerous stuff, not something a girl like you should be messing with." "A girl like you," the words stung, a casual dismissal that erased all my years of work, my intelligence, my drive, but the sting was immediately replaced by a cold, calculating thought. He was underestimating me, and that was an advantage Alex Chen never had. I forced a small, nervous laugh. "You're probably right. It's just scary. You know, the idea that people can just disappear." I saw the shift in his eyes. He wasn't seeing a threat anymore. He was seeing a woman who needed protecting. By the end of the night, I had what I needed: the location of a data drop, a crucial next step. He walked me to the door, his hand hovering near the small of my back, a gesture of proprietary concern. "Be careful." "Alexis," he said, his voice softer now. I walked out into the cool night air, my hands trembling. I wasn't shaking from fear of him, but from the dizzying complexity of what had just happened. I hated that he had looked at me that way. I hated that my body had reacted without my consent. I hated the casual sexism of his "girl like you" comment. But a part of me, a pragmatic, terrifyingly adaptive part, didn't hate the results. The costume wasn't just about the clothes anymore. The disguise was changing the way the world interacted with me, and in doing so, it was changing the very way I existed within it. I had gone into that bar to play a role, but the role had played me right back. The experience left me feeling raw, powerful, and utterly terrified of the woman I was being forced to become. The data drop Sam led me to was a key. It unlocked a series of encrypted files that painted a much darker picture of Black Eagle's ambitions. This wasn't just about creating sleeper agents or proving a philosophical point. It was about control on a mass scale, the ability to rewrite not just individuals, but society itself. By manipulating the very concept of identity, Alex had been chasing a conspiracy. Lexi was uncovering a plot to redefine humanity. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that Lexi was the only one who could do it. People talked to her. In my pursuit of new leads, I found that doors that would have been slammed in Alex's face now creaked open. A nervous secretary, who would have seen Alex as a threat, saw Lexi as a sympathetic ear and confided details over coffee. A disgruntled security guard, who would have stonewalled Alex, saw Lexi as non-threatening and let slip his patrol schedule. My femininity, the very thing that had been forced upon me as a punishment, had become my most effective weapon. This realization sparked a fundamental change in my approach. My mission was no longer just about survival or revenge. It was about strategy, and strategy required the right uniform. My wardrobe began to evolve. I was no longer just buying clothes to blend in. I was curating a persona. I stood in front of my closet one morning, the cheap dress I'd first bought hanging next to newer, more deliberate acquisitions. My gaze fell on a charcoal gray sheath dress and a tailored blazer. It was a power outfit, the kind a lawyer or an executive might wear. It projected competence, seriousness, and control. As I dressed that morning, the process felt different. The awkward fumbling was gone, replaced by a practiced efficiency. I clipped the bra into place without a second thought. My hands knew the routine, the feel of the silk lining of the blazer against my arms, the structured fit of the dress. It no longer felt alien. It felt appropriate. The clothes and the body beneath them were no longer at war. They were beginning to synchronize, to work as a single, cohesive unit. The constant, low-level physical discomfort that had plagued me for weeks had faded, replaced by a simple awareness. I knew how the fabric would move when I walked. I knew how to sit in a way that wouldn't wrinkle the skirt. These were small things, tiny pieces of knowledge that this body had absorbed, but together they represented a profound, irreversible shift. The voice of Alex in my head was growing fainter. He was no longer a constant, raging presence. He was becoming a memory, a ghost of a man I used to be. The raw anger was still there, but it was now a focused, cold rage that belonged to Lexi. The lines were blurring. It was no longer my body versus Alex's mind. It was just me. A new, strange, composite being. That afternoon, I had a meeting with a former Black Eagle scientist I had managed to track down. I met him in the lobby of a skyscraper in Midtown, a cathedral of steel and glass. I walked across the polished marble floor, the quiet click of my low heels echoing in the vast space. My posture was straight, my movements deliberate. I wasn't trying to be a man, and I wasn't trying to hide as a woman. I was simply being Lexi Chen, a woman with a purpose. When the scientist saw me, he looked relieved. He had been expecting a hard-nosed male reporter. He saw me, and his shoulders relaxed. He thought he could handle me. As we talked, I realized the core question that had been haunting me was beginning to change. In the beginning, I had told myself I need to destroy Black Eagle to get Alex back. But sitting there, expertly extracting information from this man, using the persona I had so carefully constructed, a new, more dangerous question took its place. Am I doing this to reclaim the man I was, or to prove that the woman I've become is real? The answer terrified me, because I knew, deep down, that the memory of Alex Chen was no longer a person I wanted to return to. He was a motive, a backstory. Lexi was the one sitting at the table. Lexi was the one closing in on Vane. Lexi was the one who was going to burn his entire world to the ground. Alex was the clay. Lexi was the shape it had been given, and that shape was now hardening into something permanent. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The scientist, weakened by my carefully applied pressure and his own fear, gave me Vane's location. He wasn't hiding in some secret underground bunker. He was in plain sight, operating out of a sleek, minimalist office on the top floor of a tech incubator, masquerading as a bioethicist and venture capitalist. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I didn't call the authorities. This wasn't for them. This was for me. When I walked into the building, no one stopped me. I wore the charcoal dress and blazer. My hair was pulled back in a neat, professional style, and I carried a leather portfolio. I looked like I belonged. I was announced as Alexis Chen, and I was granted immediate access. The elevator ride was silent. A smooth, swift ascent. The voice of Alex was completely gone now. There was only a cold, quiet calm. I was not the victim returning to face her tormentor. I was the endgame. Vane was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. He turned as I entered, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. There was no surprise, no fear. There was only the quiet satisfaction of an artist seeing his finished work. "Alexis," he said, his voice laced with pride. "I was wondering when you'd arrive. Please, come in." "It's over, Vane," I said, my voice even, devoid of the tremor I had expected. I have everything, all the data, the testimony, it's all going public." "I have no doubt," he said, gesturing to a chair. "You are, after all, my most successful project, relentless, incorruptible. You see, the core of you is unchanged. I merely gave you a more effective form." He walked over to a sculpture on his desk, a swirling piece of polished bronze. "I told you this was about empathy, about perspective. You see now, don't you, as Alex? You saw the world as a series of facts to be uncovered. As a man, you moved through it with an inherent privilege you never even noticed. You used force, you pushed." He trailed a long finger over the curve of the sculpture. "But as Alexis, you had to learn a different kind of power. The power of being underestimated. The power of observation. The power of connection. You didn't push doors open. You learned how to find the ones that were already unlocked. A perspective Alex Chen could never have conceived of." The rage I felt was cold and sharp. "You call this a gift? You mutilated me. You destroyed a man's life to prove a point." "I didn't destroy him," Vane said, his gaze locking with mine. "I liberated him. I took a rigid, unyielding block of marble and revealed the form that was always waiting inside. Look at you. Alexis, you are magnificent, a living, breathing work of art." And in that horrifying moment, I understood his madness. He didn't want to control me in the traditional sense. He wanted to prove that his philosophy was right, that identity was nothing more than clay for him to shape. He had changed my body to break my mind, to force me into a box of his own making. But he had failed. "You're wrong," I said. Standing up, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, a moment of terrible, absolute clarity. You gave me the cage. Vane, you built the prison, but you didn't get to decide what kind of person I built inside it. That was me, the experiences, the shame, the fear, the power, all of it. I lived it. I survived it. I am not your work of art. I am my own. He wanted to control me through this transformation, but the transformation itself had become my liberation. The experience of living as a woman in a world that saw me differently had given me a strength, a perspective. That Vane, in his cold, clinical arrogance, could never have predicted. Alex's righteous anger had been reforged into Lexi's calculated resolve. I didn't hit him. I didn't scream. I simply turned and walked away, leaving him alone in his glass tower with his twisted philosophies. My work was already done. The files were already being uploaded to every major news outlet on the planet by an automated program. By the time I reached the lobby, his world would be on fire. I stepped out onto the busy New York street, the city lights just beginning to blur in the evening dusk. I felt the cool breeze on my face, the solid pavement beneath my feet. I didn't know what my future held. There was no going back to being Alex. That man was a ghost, a story I would tell myself. Alexis was the one who had survived, the one who had won. She was forged in violence and violation, a creation of a monster's hubris. But as I walked into the anonymous crowd, a face among millions, a final, lingering question settled not in my mind, but in my soul. If I was made by violence, but I chose how to live with the result, then am I a victim, or am I finally myself? I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never would. But for the first time, I felt something that was neither Alex's anger nor Lexi's fear. It was a quiet, fragile sense of peace. I was no one's creation. I was simply mommy, and I was free.